worked for some of the biggest companies in corporate America in very fast-paced roles, gotten promoted, always done very well. Very well. What kind of pushed me from not going back and getting the formal diagnosis was I don't have it. Like, there's no way I wouldn't be where I am if I have it, right? I think I'm starting to be more self-aware, but I think that there's a lot of masking that have happened so that people don't realize that on the back end, I'm absolutely killing myself to keep up.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and today we're going to be talking about ADHD in women and how it impacts us in the workplace. My guest today is Katarina Stiles. She's spent over a decade working in sales and partnerships at some of the biggest tech and consulting companies out there. In addition to her successful corporate career, she's also the founder of Her Clarity, which is a resource and coaching platform designed to help women with ADHD find clarity, build strategies, and create careers that truly align with their strengths. Now, Katarina is joining me as an ADHD expert and as a friend who is going to help me navigate my own exploration of ADHD. We'll get into that story during the episode, but some of the topics we're going to touch on are ADHD in women, why it goes undiagnosed, how it impacts your career, and how it impacts your ability to show up authentically at work. And we'll talk about some insights on tools that you can leverage. In this episode, we will be talking about neurodivergence, specifically ADHD. And I want to just start with a quick disclaimer that neither of us are medical or mental health professionals. We're going to be sharing our own personal experiences, our own learning, but just know that this isn't a substitute for therapy or medical advice. It's always best to reach out to a qualified professional if you have questions or concerns. And for today, we're going to touch on how coaching can be a tool that can help support you with some strategies. We're going to share our own experience through our living and learning and the things that have helped us either in our discovery process or finding ways to work with the unique capabilities that we have. So I can't wait to share this conversation with you, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. Let's get into it. Okay, welcome to Working Your Way, Katarina.
I'm excited to be here.
Just started with a conversation late night. I have been having several conversations with several different friends about ADHD, which I will talk about my own kind of what is going on for me in that space. But it was just great to hear your perspective and your passion around this topic. And so I am excited to have you on both as a friend and an expert and talk about your experience both with ADHD and working with women who are trying to navigate the work world.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, the best connections happen late night over a drink after a girls' dinner. It's really exciting to be here. A little bit about me and my journey of how I got to become more of an ADHD expert and advocate for women with ADHD. I'm not alone in that I am a female and late diagnosis of ADHD. Thinking back to my childhood, I won't take you through every single year, but I think back on the struggles that I had when it came to reading, taking tests, all those things around reading comprehension. And it got chalked up to, well, you just have to try harder. You have to read more, get tutors. And my family was very supportive of getting me tutors, but I just don't think it was as well known back then. Fast forward to my early 20s, out of college and working, and I was like, something still isn't right. I feel like everything's just way too hard. Is everyone else feeling that things are this hard? So I did get tested for ADHD. Back then, when I got tested, it actually turned out that I potentially had ADHD, but they wanted to try and treat the anxiety that they also diagnosed me with. And I think that's pretty common. I think sometimes people get diagnosed with anxiety or depression or other disorders when they're trying to get diagnosed with ADHD or see if they have ADHD. And I think that's because anxiety can be a very large symptom. So I went through the whole anxiety thing, tried medicine, didn't work for me personally. Everyone has their own journeys. So I just put it on the back burner for a while. And then I think, like a lot of, especially females, when they get late diagnosed, there's a big life event that happens. And for me, I think that was the pandemic. I've always worked from home for the most part, but I think this was just so much working from home, so much work nonstop, that I was just pure burnout. And so I went back to get my formal diagnosis, and that's how I got there. I would say that it's not like a light totally switch when I got formally diagnosed. I think it just validated what I was already feeling, but it did kind of ignite that kind of fire in me to learn more about it, understand how it's affecting my work and my personal life, and to really figure out how can I help myself and then by default help others with this, because I wish I had more resources. I wish I had more people to lean on, and any women, especially in the working world, that I can help in my experience and what I've learned. I feel like it's all worth it.
Yeah. And so I'm curious about the kind of pandemic burnout experience and how that was like a catalyst to you getting maybe not curious again. You probably were curious the whole time, but like lighting a fire under you to do something differently. And, burnout shows up so differently for everybody. But what were you experiencing during that time that kind of led you to be like, something has to change?
I think a lot of people in the pandemic, and when I look at it from a career perspective, there was unfortunately a ton of layoffs across the board. And I think with layoffs come, if you're fortunate enough to keep your job, you're now doing five people's jobs. And so obviously that's enough to burn anyone out. I felt that the workload had increased. I think that there wasn't as much of an ability to separate work and life balance, right? And so I think with ADHD, especially, time is really difficult and prioritizing time. And so there's really no reason to have an off button. Whereas, like I mentioned, I've worked from home most of my career, but that's separated with being able to go out for drinks or dinner with friends after work or travel with work. And so there was no separation. And I think whether or not you had ADHD, I think people were burning out. But I think that if you do have ADHD, I think it was very much heightened. And so that was my experience. And I was like, something's got to change. My mental state wasn't good. I think that's where I mentioned, a lot of people can get diagnosed with anxiety or depression. And those are a lot of very real things. But I think that they can be a byproduct if you have underlying ADHD. So my mental well-being was not good. I was, I've been burnt out before, but this was unhealthy burnout.
Yeah, I think that idea of not having that separation, like you said, not having the normal things you would go to like enjoy your life, have connection, all of the things that help like produce dopamine in us. Yeah. And they're all gone all of a sudden. Like
literally
already.
Any form of dopamine gone.
Yeah, totally. I want to talk a little bit more about childhood, but I'm going to share just before we get so far into the conversation, like where I am in all of this. And like for me, it's been a really interesting, I'd say maybe like last year and a half, where I've been doing some of my own personal exploration. Some of that I've talked about on like episodes of this podcast. Some of it's just like really going deeper into my own work, uprooting some old stuff, old stories. Some of that catalyst to that has been family stuff. Some of it's been a program that I'm trying to do some work in. And I started to see a therapist last fall in kind of the context of all this other stuff going on and noticing some things that I wanted to change in myself. Over the holidays, so this was like January that I had an appointment with my therapist, and I was asking them about, like, I have this new philosophy with therapy right now, because typically in the past, talk therapy has not been, the story's already getting way longer than it's supposed to be, but I'm just going to go.
I love it. Keep going. That's how I tell stories.
In the past, when I've gone to therapy, traditional talk therapy for me has not been really effective, because I'm like, I understand, I intellectualize, I know kind of the things that are going on and why they're happening and all that kind of stuff. But I sought out this new therapist that's more somatic based to really like slow down the process and actually learn how to experience and feel and be with emotions more so than I ever have before. And as I've been working through some of that, there's a little more space in our sessions for like other things that come up. And so in January, I started saying, like, I'm going to bring my therapist all these deep, dark, weird things that are going on in my life that I normally wouldn't say out loud to anybody. And now I have this amazing person who's a great resource.
Yeah, that's what
So
they're
I'm
there
just gonna, like,
for.
talk about that. Exactly. And so I notice, and this happens every year around the holidays and between Christmas and New Year's, there's that kind of like dead zone, which can be like a really amazing time to like refresh and do things or go on vacations or whatever. But I typically am at home during that time. And I really get into this like really deep funk during that time. And I was talking to my therapist about like things like the dishes pile up or my place gets really messy or like these kind of like household things that if I were having a party, which I do often, my place will be like perfect, pristine. Everything's in its place. It looks amazing. But when it's just me there, things are just like, it gets to a chaos level. And so I was talking to my therapist about this, and they were like, have you ever considered that you might be neurodivergent? And it was the first time that I had ever even thought that could be a possibility. But then they were describing the dopamine deficiency, they were describing the external motivation is so much more effective if something is urgent or someone's asking for something or you're accountable to somebody to do something. Having that motivation to do it is so much more there for people with ADHD than if there's no kind of urgency around it or it doesn't seem important. And so I just went down this rabbit hole, as I do with many topics, of learning and understanding and talking to them about it. And I kind of did have a little bit of that light bulb moment, and it came along with some of the other things that I had started to realize about my own kind of life story, or like at least the narrative that I had in my head about it, where I always have had this kind of story in my head. I've always believed that I was like a really great student. I got all A's and a couple of B's, and in my corporate career, got promoted and did really well, got great reviews and all those things. And so because I have been traditionally able to like be successful in traditional systems in school, in corporate work, I never even considered that maybe I wasn't quote unquote normal or neurotypical. It was always like no, well, that's not even a consideration. And so it was really interesting to have that happening at the same time that I was recognizing some other things, even about like getting all A's in school. When I really think about it, like I cut a lot of corners, and I was able to like write a book report by reading a couple of the paragraphs in each chapter instead of actually reading the book. Because when I tried to read the book, I didn't know I wasn't paying attention. My mind would wander, or I'd be bored and I wouldn't want to, so it's like this weird thing of like, just because I got A's, I thought I was a good student. Actually, I really wasn't, because I didn't learn most of the stuff I was supposed to learn in school, right?
So I do have a question for you. So when your therapist brought up, and I do want to touch on like getting good grades in school and doing well in corporate world and how oftentimes it gets undiagnosed because of that. But I first want to understand, like, how did you feel when your therapist was like, have you thought that maybe you're ADHD? Did it, I know you said you've had the aha moment, but did it just start to open the floodgates, and how did it feel?
It really did. It opened the floodgates in, I think, a really good way. And where I am now is like, I don't kind of identify with the, like, yes, I have ADHD, but it's like, I certainly believe that I am somewhere on the spectrum of neurodivergence, and like that dopamine deficiency and things that it causes, like 100% resonate with me. First of all, it was like, whoa, like kind of like a, what I do is all about self-awareness. And so if you ask any of my friends or family who's knows themselves the best out of anyone they would say me, right? And then it's like this whole thing just like whopped me over the head. So it's kind of like, wow, this huge thing that I never considered, I'm now considering. And so there was just like a a bigness to that. It wasn't like positive or negative, but I think one of the things that was so helpful, and I know this is something that you feel really passionate about, is I just always thought that I was lazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the reason that I don't make my bed or let dishes pile up or whatever silly mundane things that like I'll do when someone's coming over, but not just when it's me
Any
at
other
home
time?
for a
Yeah.
week. Right.
Yeah.
I just thought that I was lazy or I procrastinate a lot. And so for me, it was, I would say like kind of a relief, but actually I think it's just more of a like, oh, this thing I thought the whole time that I did make myself feel bad for
Mm-hmm.
actually has a different explanation. And there's something I could do about it. And so that feels really comforting, exciting, because it's like, oh, there's something I can do. I could just do some things differently and actually not then have that thing that I feel bad about.
Yeah. It's so interesting. You touch on so many good things. So I think the overarching theme of what's called masking, and there's obviously definitions out there people can look up, but what masking really is hiding or putting a mask over who you really are. And it's not intentional. It can come from years and years, especially with women being diagnosed late. Years of trying to subdue maybe some of the characteristics that come with ADHD and the way that your brain works. And so you mentioned that you're very self-aware. I'd like to think I'm pretty self-aware. I have a really high emotional intelligence and kind of see everything happening and very aware of my situation, people around me, what people are thinking, feeling. I take on people's feelings. But some of these big glaring things, even if I had a suspicion I have ADHD, some of these big glaring things, I was like, oh, that's why. So I feel like a lot of it was because I was masking it, and you probably feel the same on some of those things. But I also wanted to go back to the point of you did well in school, you've done really well in the corporate world, and same. I did A's and B. I wasn't a straight A student, A's and B's. But to your point, if I could find something on Cliff Notes, I would always do it at the last
100%.
minute. Yeah, I'm like Cliff Notes
Yeah.
BFF here. I even remember there was, sorry, mom and dad, this is exactly where my senior year knew exactly how many classes I could skip and still graduate. And not because I was like some rebel, but just because I was not interested in my classes. Like there was a lot of classes that I wasn't interested in. So I knew exactly how many classes I could skip or go to in order to ensure I graduated. And I would do a lot of my assignments the night before. And I remember my parents getting frustrated with me, rightfully so. They're stressed for me not doing my work. But that's when I did my best work, right down to right before. And that went into college. I look back in college and I did well, aside from economic statistics. That was my worst class. But I did really well. But I look back and I was always the last person taking a test. I always struggled to, if I didn't find interest in something, forget it. Like I had a history art class one time and I just could not get myself to study for the finals or do any of the homework. And that followed into my career. Again, top performer, like you mentioned. I've worked for some of the biggest companies in corporate America in very fast-paced roles, gotten promoted, always done very well. Very well. And so a lot of times what kind of pushed me from not going back and getting the formal diagnosis was I don't have it. Like, there's no way I wouldn't be where I am if I have it, right? And I think that's one of the hardest things is, and even people who look at me, if I tell them I have ADHD, they're like, you do not have ADHD. You're so well put together. You do so well. I am a little different in a sense that my apartment's very organized and clean, but I have found through coaching and therapy that it's very clean because I get distracted if I see little messes everywhere. And it's also my way of
Yeah.
procrastinating, like, oh, I organized the spice drawer because I didn't want to submit that expense report. That's why. So I think I am starting to be more self-aware, but I think that there's a lot of masking that have happened so that people don't realize that on the back end, I'm absolutely killing myself to keep up. I mean, the amount of lists I have, the amount of calendar reminders. I have a reminder on my calendar to walk my dog and eat lunch, right? Like that's how much I need support. And I think I've just naturally put those in place over the years without even realizing like, oh, you're doing the most to keep up with everything. And sometimes it's just it's a lot. So I feel you on everything that you were mentioning.
Yeah. And you brought up so many points about like, why does ADHD not get diagnosed in women? Before we started recording, I was telling you about a really good friend of mine who just got diagnosed. And so you talked a little bit about the masking idea. And I think this like topic of a social norm and how little girls are different from little boys, and also how it shows up differently in males versus females. I think that's like an interesting topic. And I had heard, yeah, on one of the, as I've gone on my research rabbit hole,
I've been down that whole rabbit hole time since, so I'm with you.
but like in school, maybe an ADHD boy is like over here, I don't know, like throwing gum at the chalkboard or whatever because he's not like able to focus on what's going on. And the girl that would have the same thing, still not able to focus on what's going on, is like looking at the teacher and nodding and smiling. Just like that cue of like, there's a problem here just didn't exist or doesn't exist with a lot of girls, because it's like, oh, I'm just playing the role of like being a good student, even though I'm having the same distraction problem as the kid next to me, you know? And so that I found to be so interesting, and how like social norms play a role in it.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. I'm in an ADHD life coaching course. In the first 3 months, we learn about everything ADHD, and most of us in the class are ADHD. So naturally, we've already gone down this rabbit hole and also learned everything about ADHD, which is super funny. But one of the classes we took was around the differences in how it presents in males and females, but also at different stages of your life, because the way it presents when you're a kid versus a teenager versus a young adult versus once you're in your elder years, if you will, is so different. And I think that the couple big things with why it's really missed a lot of times in females, and it's because, like you just mentioned, I think a lot of people think of ADHD as the little boy running around with so much energy all over the place, can't get them to settle down. But there's actually, I think don't quote me, but the DSM-5, whatever version is out, again, not a licensed health professional here, but there are 3 types that are listed out now because they recognize that there's so many different variations, and it's hyperactive, inattentive, and combined. And so you think of the little boy all over the place, super hyperactive, but a lot of times ADHD can present in females as the inattentive, where it's more of the daydreaming, not paying attention, maybe a little out there and just not as engaged in what's going on. And so, like you said, maybe they're just sitting there listening, but not actually listening. I think a lot of people are like, well, they don't have ADHD, they're not running around, right? And I think the other aspect of it, which was super apparent and really hit home for me, is that hyperactivity isn't always just outward physical hyperactivity. It can be hyperactivity in your mind. Like, I cannot ever shut my mind off. It is the tiniest boy running around in circles in my head.
Just little thought boys.
Yeah, it's like little thought boys, like causing chaos in school and in my head all the time. And so hyperactivity can show up so differently. And I think that's why, a lot of times it gets missed. I also think, even if, again, like everyone can have different ways in which it presents, I think even if a female has the hyperactivity type of ADHD and it presents in that, or it wants to present in that kind of outward blurting things out, interrupting, and just outwardly presentation, I think that society in general, the way that girls and women and females are raised, is to keep nice, keep it quiet, go by the rules. And I think we're just taught that. I mean, you see it in movies. Growing up, you see it in shows. It's just, you look around and you see, a lot of moms do that. And so I think, especially as a little kid, if you have ADHD and that's kind of what you see in society, you start to realize, without even realizing it, that like, oh, I can't do something that feels natural to me. Like, I have to continue to keep it in and hide it. And that's where the masking comes in. Or if you go against the rules and let it come out, you're yelled at, or you're told that you're not doing a good job, or you're not doing it right. And males also have that problem, especially as kids. If they're not diagnosed until much later, the amount of times that they're told you're not doing a good enough job or you're not behaving right, and even if it's not their fault. I just think with females, there's a societal aspect to why you hold it all in.
It makes so much sense now. And, talking about the DSM-5 or any medical textbook that's studied still even in the year 2025, it's like the representation of who the studies were done on and how things present are like just so exclusive. And generally, women are left out of studies. Oftentimes, people of color are left out of the studies. And so I think we're getting better in that area, but it's like there's still so much progress to be made.
There's so much progress. And even in my class that I'm taking, like you mentioned, like the studies, there's still not many studies out there. And I think with women especially, studies are important because hormones affect ADHD. It affects it as you go throughout your life with estrogen affecting dopamine. Obviously, ADHD is a lot connected to dopamine, lower levels. And so that ebbs and flows throughout your menstrual cycles, throughout perimenopause, menopause, and there's really not much study done on it, which is unfortunate. I think that there's a ton more awareness about ADHD. I think that's due in part to, honestly, social media. I think a lot of people are putting their lived experiences out there, and there's just a lot more knowledge sharing. And obviously, you have to be careful with what's factual, what's not. But I think even just putting out how you're feeling about stuff is helpful. So I hope that things will be studied a lot more. And I hope that the more people talk about it, especially like I know when I want to have kids, I'll be able to know what to look for because it presents so differently. Everyone's different. So why would everyone have the same presentation of something?
Yeah, it's so true. And it's funny you mentioned social media. I think there's so many TikToks out there now about ADHD. I think there have to be like thousands of people who have self-diagnosed like autism or ADHD because of TikTok, because of people sharing their lived experiences. It's that exact same thing. It's like, I just never considered this, but now I've seen all of these videos of people talking about their life and hacks that they've had to put in place or things like that. And it's like, oh, I never realized that like when you have a song in your head, like listening to it, the same one song on repeat 50 times wasn't something that everybody does. Like,
That was me this morning.
Course, referring back to the disclaimer, we're not saying any of these things are going to be definitively like you have a condition or don't, but it's like those little things start to add up and it's like, maybe I should look at this.
Yeah, that's really funny that you say that because I had an event in the city today and I drove there and I literally played the same song probably as many times as I could before I got there because I was like, it just sounds so great every time. So and sometimes I play it and realize it's finished and I didn't listen to it because I was distracted by the little kids running around in my head.
I think as you're talking about why diagnoses get missed or why people maybe don't even consider that ADHD might be a thing that they're living with and they can do something about, for me, it's interesting because I think obviously one of the things, and I'll ask you to share what are some of the main pieces of, or what are the main things that you should consider. But for me, what I've noticed a lot of is the motivation aspect of it is a really big factor. And when I had a homework deadline, when I had a corporate, like a big presentation, or I was somebody who always left my expense reports to the last minute or turned them in late regularly. But I would wait until like the third warning email that was going to have your manager copied on it before I would do it. Right before that,
I got my corporate card shut off because I just ignored it so many times. So yeah, I got to the extreme.
It's those almost like contradictory things of like, oh, you're sitting here talking to like two quote unquote high achieving women who do a lot of things well and get the approval of people in many different ways. And yet like I was on the bad kid list for expense reports being turned in late so many times. And it's like, maybe that should have been a sign. Like, why not just do it right away? And it's like, it's the motivation piece. And what I've noticed, especially working for myself, it becomes a really unique challenge. And one of the things that I talked to my therapist about was this idea of like when tasks are too big, too vague, or too boring, that is when I'm going to have the most trouble with them. And I was like, like I decided I was going to spend a whole day doing my website and it would be like, yes, I have 8 hours and it's going to be perfect by the end of the day. And I like couldn't even get started. And learning more about the way that my brain works, saying, oh, I need to break it down into smaller tasks. I need to break it down into something that's like I could do in 10 minutes just to get me started. And that's going to help so much. Or do the most fun part of it first. And like just understanding that motivation is so important to like harness. On one hand, as an entrepreneur, I'm doing work that I love, that's like really exciting and the best stuff. And I have no one telling me what to do when I need to do it. And so going from corporate where it was like, I had these issues, I think they've become a lot more extreme since I started my own business. And I think that's also part of something that's like rose my awareness about it.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of good points. I forget who it was that said it, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. It's not a deficit, it's really an interest-based thing where it's like, if you're not interested in something, it becomes very difficult to want to do that. Like you mentioned, one of the things, if it's just kind of boring to you, a lot of people have things that are boring to them because I'll hear a lot of times, well, I don't like to do my expense reports either. I'm like, yeah, but have you gotten your corporate card shut off because you haven't done it? Probably not. So there are always going to be boring things and not fun things that we have to do in our life. I think that the difference is that neurotypical people will just realize that it's boring and then do it. Whereas I will clean my entire apartment before I ever get to that one thing that I don't want to do because I can listen to my podcast while I'm cleaning and I find my podcast interesting, right? So I think that a better way of looking at it is just interest-based. And I think it does come up a lot, especially when you're becoming your own boss and you don't have the pressures. I think I mentioned earlier how I would get things done, but I would get them done last minute, which I do my best work 10 minutes before I need to present, right? But at what expense? And so I think that's where it gets difficult to figure out, okay, well, I'm still getting it done. So what's the harm here? The harm is on, I'm one to speak, but the harm is on your body, it's on your mental health, and it's just not sustainable. And so I'm curious how you have started to come up with some strategies, or if you have, to figure out for those boring tasks. You mentioned maybe starting with something that's more interesting or fun or breaking it down more. I know I've heard a lot of these strategies and I do a lot of them. The breaking it down can be really difficult for me. So I'm curious what your experience has been with some of that.
I'll just share some examples of like that piece. I have 5 or 6 pages on my website, and there was something that needed to change on every one of them. I want to refine some of my services or the language or this or that. And so not saying I'm going to spend 8 hours doing this. Instead, it's like, okay, I'm going to break it down into like what's going to take me 30 minutes. That was part of something that was helpful. But then what's the most fun part of this? So one of them was I was updating the podcast page on my website. I needed to like redesign it. But then I was like, oh, I'm going to go just do a little bit of research on what other people who have podcasts that I really look up to, what do their pages look like?
I see where this is going.
You could pay me, well, no, but if you could pay me to be a professional looker-upper, I would crush life. Like, seriously, I love
that should be a job.
Following a curiosity and like Googling it or going on ChatGPT or like going on social and finding out like what pair of shoes this woman wore in whatever episode of whatever show. I was like, oh, that part's fun. I want to look at examples of a couple of podcast pages. So I started with that. And then I found a couple. And then I was like, okay, I need to add this. I want to change this around. I want to reformat this part. Done. But like starting with the part that sounded exciting was so helpful. And then I did the podcast page and it took me honestly like 30 minutes, Katarina. Like it was like, I've been putting this on my calendar for how long and moving it every time that it would get to the day where I was supposed to do it. And then I didn't get to it because I did something else.
I started laughing because I would do the fun things first. And then sometimes I find myself then just getting into a deep hole of now I'm on everyone else's podcast websites and I'm down these rabbit holes and now it's like 8 hours later. And so that 30-minute fun thing was supposed to not go that long. But yeah, I agree. I think some of these task initiation things can be super difficult. I don't know what it is about booking an appointment over the phone, like a doctor's office or a hair salon, a nail salon, if they have an online, I will choose something based on if they have an online calendar where I can just select a time versus having to call and talk through and wait for someone to pick up the phone to book something. I don't know what it is. I don't know exactly how that relates back to ADHD, but I guess I'm not interested in it. It's not interesting for me.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that you brought up earlier about, well, why I should just be able to do this. Why not? And I think, yes, we think that. And I also think that saying that so many times is what repetitively puts that shame or that feeling of, I'm lazy, I'm stupid, or why can't I do these things that seems so easy for everyone else? And I think that's a really hard thing to undo when you feel that way. Even now, I still can get very hard on myself of like, why didn't you just book the dang appointment? But I think that finding out more and learning more about ADHD has made me feel less alone and also more validated in the fact that, okay, I'm not stupid. I'm not lazy. You know, I do so many other things. It's just some of these things I don't love to do. And one of the things I'm starting to lean into more is like, where can I delegate? Where can I delegate certain tasks to? Which is hard. I don't know about you. And maybe it's also another thing going back to females with ADHD, like feeling like you don't want to ask for help, or it's hard to ask for help, or you have to do it all. And I think it's just a very important thing to think about. So I'm curious if that's crossed your mind as well, the topic of delegating and or feeling like you need to do it all.
It's funny, my like podcast team, half of them are ADHD and they're men with ADHD, but like part of it is the outsourcing part of it, but part of it is also for me, and this was before I even was exploring this for myself, but knowing that having an external deadline is helpful for me. Yes, it's super helpful to like, do I need to learn sound editing? Could I? Maybe, sure. I mean, I wouldn't do it as well as they do, but like, could I have learned how to DIY it? Yes. And then would I have probably not liked doing it and let all my episodes pile up and like never actually publish them, right? Like, yeah, there are many courses, online courses that I've like purchased that I just like haven't gotten to because I know I need them, but I think they're going to be boring. So the outsourcing part is one, okay, I'll get more done if I have someone else doing these parts, right? Like I do pay someone to clean my house because it's like not something that I love doing and it's worth it for me. But the having some kind of external pressure to like deliver things on a certain date is incredibly helpful for me. And so knowing that, okay, every Thursday an episode's coming out and 2 weeks before that, this part has to be done and that part has to be done. It's like, it's helped me be so much more consistent. That's part of why I think entrepreneurship can be challenging is that if it's a client deliverable, I'll have it done, you know? And yes, might I wait until the last minute to start parts of it? Sure. But again, I do my best thinking under pressure, like you said. Yes. But I'll always have that done on time. But if it's my own website for me that's going to help my business, but there's nobody telling me I need to do it by a certain date, like that will sit and get moved on my to-do list and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's both the time management, the motivation piece of it that like becomes a unique challenge when you don't have somebody telling you what you need to do when and when it's due.
Yeah, 100%. I'm the same way. I need timelines and I need deadlines. I have my own coach for the things that I'm doing outside of my day job with my website and my coaching and all of that. She gives me homework and I ask her to give me homework because then I have that pressure of like, I want to get this done before my next session. I think that the deadlines is a huge thing. I think that I've been outsourcing. And so I think just calling on some of the areas that have worked is really important for people to realize that you don't have to do all these things, or you can ask for a kind of, whether it's a coach or a friend or a partner, the buddy system of holding you accountable, I think is huge, especially with women. But I feel like I personally have had a really hard time in my life asking for help, very hard time. To the point where my therapist is like, why don't we learn to like ask for one thing a week, ask for help for something, right? And so I just wanted to put it out there because I feel like sometimes people need to hear that it's okay to ask for help. And I think that outsourcing or having deadlines or having accountability coaches or whatever it might be is super important, especially when you're on your ADHD journey.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a study done on it, but like hyper independence and high achieving women go hand in hand, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I do
Yeah.
certainly suffer from that in a lot of ways. So we've been talking about the challenges of ADHD in career, right? Like motivation, time management. What are some of the other ones that we haven't talked about?
One of the big challenges for me is the people pleasing thing. I think it does go hand in hand with the asking for help. I think that you tell yourself a narrative that you're not good enough or you're not smart enough because things are more challenging for you. And so, in order to make up for it and show that I am worthy, I can do these things, I do them well, I'll say yes to every single piece of work that someone throws my way because I want to show that I'm good at my job. Because deep down, I don't always feel good, or I might feel like I'm trying so hard here, even though I do well. It's not the narrative that I've told myself. And so, I think that people pleasing can be a big challenge that comes up, at least personally for me. And it's been a lot of work, and I also think it goes back to prioritization of I want to help everyone. I think it comes from somewhere good, but it also comes with a detriment of myself and my well-being. And so a lot of what I've been working on is like when to say yes, when to say no. And that's hard. I think even for people without ADHD, that can be really hard because you want to make everyone happy, but that's just not the reality.
Yeah, I think when you start from a place of like the way that everyone else was learning in school wasn't designed for how you learn and all of that kind of stuff, and it builds and you, like you had mentioned, maybe end up in this place where you feel like you have to prove things to yourself or to
Hmm.
others, right? Like I'm really good at this. Like, yes, saying no becomes like a really particular challenge because it's like, well, no, I can't say no to that. Like it becomes a matter of survival at that point. It's like I need to be valuable. I need to show people that I can do all of this stuff. So
Yeah.
that totally makes sense.
I think just to double click into kind of the executive functioning and a few things there that I think, especially in the workplace, can be really difficult is around prioritization and time management. And I think they can become a pretty big challenge because when it's hard to prioritize, everything's important and everything is important right now. And I need to get all the things done right now. And I think a lot of people with ADHD say this a lot is we look at time as now or not now, kind of time unawareness. And so it feels so heavy when you have all these big things, all these big projects with work, or, I'm renovating a house and I'm taking my ADHD coaching training and just life in general. And so when it comes to, especially on the work side, I think prioritization can be very hard. And so I notice now more, I'm self aware of when I'm starting to burn out and starting to really look at what I need to do and like, does it actually need to be done now? Because time awareness, like I'm working on it. I do some of the tips and tricks of like timing things and seeing like, oh, it actually doesn't take that long. But I think one of the things that is super important to me just in how I work. I know a lot of what you do is around authenticity. For me, what's super important is being authentic with my coworkers. And the more comfortable I've gotten talking about my ADHD, the more I've been sharing about it. And with that comes, hey, by the way, when I ask 5,000 questions, it's not because I'm questioning your expertise or anything like that, but it's how my brain works and how I'm able to understand a topic. And once I learn it, a genius in it, not a genius, but I will never ever forget it. Or, telling my manager, I put it actually this year in my individual development plan. I have to better prioritize. I am going to block off time. I'm working on this with my coach. I'm blocking off time on my calendar that I turn my Slack notifications off or Teams or whatever, you're using to communicate with people. Maybe it's your phone, you're putting on do not disturb. I have to do these things and I'm becoming more self-aware of doing them. But I think a lot of it comes with the openness that you are eventually able to get once you self-accept and then tell others. I think it was very freeing to tell more people at work about ADHD because it's kind of like, okay, it's out there. So if I overshare, I can just say it's my ADHD, which most of the time it is. So it's the executive functioning challenges with work, I think can be helped by being more open and more authentic about how your brain works within the workplace or just in life in general.
Yeah, I definitely relate to learning through like almost being like a high context learner. I don't know if that's an official thing or not, but I am really similar
It is
way.
now.
I just want to ask all the questions so that I can understand it and I can put all the pieces in place in my mind and then I can go do it or recommend something to you or whatever it is. And so that helps me a lot. And on time management, I heard this term like time blindness that like
Yeah.
tasks, you can get lost in tasks. And I absolutely do that, which is why I think you were laughing when I said I was going to research all the podcast pages. Because, yes, I certainly could have spent 3 hours doing that when it was supposed to be a 5-minute task. But actually, in my exploration of ADHD for myself, I got this little timer that has 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes. That's a good one. So this one's like
Yeah.
very cute. I should have brought it on. You like flip it to whatever timing and it'll
Oh, I have
automatically
seen
start.
those. Yeah.
And then you flip it over and it resets. It's so, and it's like fun and cute. And I needed to read this thing. I'm doing this like book club thing. And I was obviously so behind on my reading because if I would
miss
have
half
read
the books.
exactly, I could have read 10 pages a day for 10 days, but no, I decided to read 100 pages 2 hours before the book club meeting on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
So I set the little timer. I put it on top of my phone so that every time I got the urge to go look something up or like check my text or whatever, the timer was on top of my phone and I saw the timer and I was like, oh, 20 more minutes to read. And then you get to take a break. And so like those little things have been not just helpful hacks, but like actually really enlightening in terms of what is happening in my brain and how much I get distracted, how often I go to like grab my phone to look something up, or when I'm getting ready for dinner to go out with my girlfriends, how many times instead of putting my mascara on and being done being ready, I think like, oh, I have that shirt in the dryer, let me go get it out. And then I see something else that I need to go do. And that leads me to another thing. And then it's like 10 minutes have gone by and I needed to leave the house 5 minutes ago.
Yep.
Those things have been so interesting to notice in myself. And I live alone. So I think also I don't have someone else around noticing that I do that stuff and like calling me out on it.
Yeah.
And so doing this kind of like little experiment with myself, I'm like, oh, yeah, I do get distracted a lot more than I would have ever thought, or have that urge to pick up my phone and Google something when I'm in the middle of reading a book and I need to hurry up and finish these pages. So I think the distraction and the relationship to time has been like, that's been a really big aha for me for sure.
Yeah. It's funny when you mentioned book club. I think that the women that I'm in a book club with, like when they're like, all right, who read the book? They know to just skip me half the time because I'm like, I'm here for the fun, guys. I'm here for the wine. If it's a book that I'm super interested in because I actually read the synopsis, I'll definitely do it. It's difficult sometimes. So I just laughed at that.
Yes, exactly. Are there any other challenges that we didn't talk about that feel important?
Oh, I guess the other kind of big thing, especially when it comes to the workplace that I think, and kind of what got me into wanting to help other women with ADHD in their careers, is around your workplace environment. I think your environment has a huge impact on how you work, how you think, whether or not you have ADHD. I think it does. And I feel like there's studies in like Norway and stuff about like how like your environment really impacts the way that you operate. And I think it's super important to think through. It was interesting. This morning, I actually was in downtown. I was at an MBA program talking to business analytics students about career progression. And a lot of questions were around, how do I know what to do or what to look for when I'm looking to find my first job out of my MBA program? And a lot of it it's obviously like your skills, right? And it's also what industry you're in, what you're interested in. But I think a lot of times people don't necessarily think about what the environment is like, what the work environment is like. And you can't always know all of that up front. And I think There's flexibility now that a lot of companies allow you to work from home, or if you're an entrepreneur, you can work from home. But I think your environment is such a big thing because my first job out of college, I was at a desk, I was by one of the doors, I was by the printer. And so every 2 seconds, I was distracted. And that's not conducive to me being able to do my best work. And so sometimes people may be not as happy in their careers or their job, and it might be something that they're not even thinking about, like where they physically are and what is around them. And I have noticed that the days that I work from home in my home office, I get a lot more done than if I go downtown into my corporate office. I recognize there has to be both, but I think advocating for what's helpful for you in your environment in the workplace, not always easy, but I think that's something to think about when you're looking at, is this a career for me or a job for me or a company for me?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's all those little things that
Hmm.
somebody may not even notice that could be a really big distraction for someone else. I remember for a long time, like working in the corporate world, going to an office in the suburbs, it was all gray and cubicles. Like there was
Yeah.
like a lack of motivation there, right? And when I was then
Hmm.
looking for jobs, looking to leave that company, I was looking at every company's office and what it
Yeah.
looked like. And did it seem cool and fun to go into, right?
Yeah.
So those things do make a difference.
Yeah.
And I think on this topic of authenticity, right? It's the idea that it's okay for things to be important to you or to like really just like claim them and own them and know that they're important to you and like find work that fits with those things, right? I think that's a really important piece of it when we don't call things out or know these things and like mask at work or ignore it or diminish its importance and say like what's shallow to think about like to choose a job based on the office. It's like actually no, it does make a difference. And so I think just being okay with recognizing these things and calling them out can like be such a big help in and of itself.
So I think there's a difference. A lot of people just don't want to go into an office because they don't want to have to commute to an office, and working from home. And a lot of companies have gone to the work from home model, although it's changing sometimes. And I think there's a difference in just not wanting to commute because it's inconvenient, which yes, it is. And I think all companies should have an option for at least hybrid. That's my personal opinion. But I think there's a difference in the inconvenience in working in an office versus home versus the difficulty or the challenges in how you produce from a work perspective because of your environment. I think that, to your point, like people might think, oh, like I shouldn't ask for this or decide on a company because of this. And it's not a trivial thing. Like it's a big thing and it's an important thing. And I think that people, and this is just one example where I think people who are neurodivergent, like with ADHD or whatever it is, you might downplay things that you should feel comfortable opening up about and advocating for yourself. And it's not easy, but I think the more you learn and the more you realize what you have challenges with and what your strengths are, the more you'll feel comfortable in advocating for them and not diminishing them.
Yeah. And to the point that you made about are you more productive and effective in a different environment or an environment with like these other factors, owning, claiming, advocating for those needs will make you more successful at what you do, right? And so it's like that authenticity can really lead to better results
Hmm.
for the business, you know, not just for you, but like better career moves for you as well. And so talking about authenticity, let's talk about some of the like unique talents that ADHD brings along with it. You know, we've talked about some of the things that have been like challenges that we've noticed in our lives and maybe some of the tips that we've had for getting
Yeah.
around those. But like
Yeah.
what's the great side of ADHD and what do you bring to the table that a
Yeah.
neurotypical person might not?
Yeah. It's so interesting. When I started really reading about ADHD, I saw a lot of people refer to like, what are your superpowers with ADHD or your difficulties? And I feel like challenges is a really good word because I think challenges, like everyone has challenges and our challenges are going to be different than others. Everyone has their own set of challenges. And I think that strengths are a really good word for thinking about like where you excel. And I think it is hard when you have ADHD to pick out these strengths because I feel like you're consistently hard on yourself. So Have I had to have that question memorized and ready to go in interviews? What are your three strengths? What are your three weaknesses or whatever? Of course. But I think over the past couple years, 4 or 5 years since I've been formally diagnosed, I've been a lot more self-aware of what I'm good at. And I don't know if that also comes with age, just better understanding who you are as a person. But I think one of the things that I think is a huge strength is my emotional intelligence. I'm very empathetic and aware of kind of everyone's emotions around me and how to navigate human situations, if that's even a term. I think about in order to be successful in my day job, in sales, I have to understand how people think, why they think, how to navigate really complex situations and human emotions. And I think my big strength is putting myself in other people's shoes so that I can see both sides. I think my huge strength is having empathy for others, and it's bode very well in my career because I feel like I can connect really easily and quickly with people. I'm an open book too, like that going back to the authenticity thing. We work with people more than sometimes we see our family and our loved ones. So I like to be open and be a human with them. But as a strength, they can also have some of the challenges of I take on so many people's emotions, which can sometimes be tiring, but I do like that I'm empathetic.
I think one of the things that I had heard about, like pattern recognition,
Yes.
which I think can be both people patterns and I don't know,
Yes.
data patterns that could play in different ways. But like, that's probably the thing I do most often outside. Well, I do it on the podcast too, because sometimes I'll have a guest and I'm like, have you noticed that this might be a theme? Usually I say it after we stop recording. But the thing I spend most of my time doing is working with people on their personality patterns and pulling the threads and seeing like, do you see how this relates to this? And how these three things that you're doing are all really rooted in the same kind of core need, right? And so it's like, it's so funny that now I'm learning all these terms and like discovering all this stuff now. And I'm like, I've been doing this for, like this is what I've been doing it professionally for the last 6 years. But then even before that, just with friend interactions and things like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I would say that's another big strength that I've noticed. I sometimes refer to myself as a master dot connector. So spotting trends and figuring out like why things matter to something else. And I think that kind of plays into what we were talking about before of I ask a lot of questions. My mom would call me like, you're the but why kid, like the but why, and asking all those questions because I think that because we want to get to such a deeper level in understanding whether it's a work process, whether it's the data or whether it's people or a situation, I think about whenever there's a challenging situation and I want to know how I solve it. I think one of the biggest things is I collect all of the data. And sometimes that's not great because you want to be able to move fast and not have to have every piece of data to make decisions for sure. But I think that the pattern recognition and being able to see trends that sometimes I think back, and even before I was formally diagnosed, I'm like, does anyone else see this? Is anyone else seeing that this process is broken or that like there's tension on this call or like we're not speaking the same language when we're talking about something work specific and being able to call those things out. So I have a lot of friends with ADHD. I'm in my ADHD coaching class and it's women from all over the world with ADHD, which is super fun. And I think this is a huge thing that they all feel is that pattern recognition. And I do think it comes back to like the diving deeper into things and really being able to want to understand. If there was a pattern recognition when it came to an expense report process, probably wouldn't recognize those patterns, but everything else I'm interested in, I'd probably recognize.
Yeah, and the only pattern that I recognized that the system was very inefficient, and I didn't like using it. So
but it wasn't gamified or anything.
Yeah, exactly. That would be actually a very smart thing to do for a company. But what are some other kind of unique talents?
I think just kind of on the entrepreneurial side, I have always felt very much like I have a lot of ideas. And I think a lot of them don't always fully come to fruition, but I have a lot of very creative ideas. I don't know if there's a stat out there. I'm sure there probably is. I'm sure we could hyper-focus and deep dive on it later. But I think that there's a certain percentage of entrepreneurs who are neurodivergent. And I think that comes with the territory of wanting to do your own thing and have every day be different. But I also think that the creativity that a lot of neurodivergent people have is a huge strength. I think that in order to have your own business and your podcast and all of these different things that you're doing, there has to be that level of creativity there and wanting every day to be something new and exciting. And I think that is such a huge strength, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're working in corporate America. There are the creative minds. And then I think that there are the people that can also then just sit down and put it together and actually operationally plan it, which is good for them. We need both sides. So I think that creativity is a huge strength. And we need a lot of the creative people in this world.
I think along those lines, like something that I think stands out is like curiosity, which can often be a distraction, when it's like, oh, I just thought of this thing and I need to look it up right now, right? But like, I do think there's this intellectual curiosity that comes along with that, or I want to know more, or I'll just keep asking you questions about your life because I'm like in the back of my mind putting all the puzzle pieces together, right? And so I think there's an investigative quality that can come up with more unique ideas or just happen upon really interesting things to go and pursue. And so I think, that is, you mentioned the entrepreneurial piece. It's like to build a business where most of the time you're doing stuff that's really interesting. And when I do get distracted in a presentation, because I'm like, well, what about this? Or has there ever been a study done on this? It's like, it's helping. Ultimately, like it's adding into me being better at what I do, having more resources for clients and things like that. So it's almost like building a business around my curious mind, making that an asset.
I feel like a lot of these strengths and challenges can be kind of intertwined, but I think, like I mentioned earlier about how ADHD is really more like an interest-based thing. It's not lack of focus by any means. It's hyper-focusing on certain topics that you are interested in. And I think hyper-focusing, while it can also be a challenge sometimes because you have to stop yourself at certain points, I also think it can be a huge strength where if I am really interested in something and I want to learn more about it, I will learn everything that there is to learn about it. And that's what happened when I got formally diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
I'm like, I will learn going to my ADHD class. I'm like, learn that, because I went down my rabbit holes. But I think that hyperfocus is a huge strength because if I really am interested, I can be an Einstein on a topic in a couple of days or give me a couple of hours, whatever it is. But especially when I do learn about something and I get all of the aspects or the data points that I need, I don't forget it. It's not something where I learn it and then later on I don't forget it. And I think for me, that's been super helpful for work things, especially because processes or who to go to for what, a lot of people come to me saying, oh, I know Katarina will probably know. I mean, sometimes I don't always want to be the easy button because of this, but I think because I've cared and wanted to hyper-focus and go down that rabbit hole of learning everything about it, I become very much of a strong resource for people to tap into on specific topics.
Yeah, I love that. It's like because of all the questions and the context you gather, knowing how all the pieces and parts work together, you can then be a resource in such a different way.
Yeah. It's a strength, but can also be a challenge. And I think that's where the balance of what I'm learning actually in my coaching is if you always do everything for everyone because you are a resource, they will always come to you for everything. And so how can you get people to get to where they need to be without just giving them the easy button? So it's a strength and can be a challenge sometimes, but
building an over-reliance on you and your knowledge base.
I'm like, I don't know. It's funny. I forgot. So just kidding.
Remember we were talking about burning out because you say yes to everything.
See, like everything is a very fine balance for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly it, right? Like everybody outside of a conversation around ADHD, like we all have strengths and when we overuse those strengths is where we get ourselves into trouble, right? And so it is always about balance and how do you harness things and use them in ways that like really help you and serve you. But that was a great segue into talking about tips and tricks and things that you found that work for you. So we talked about a couple of things throughout, like this little timer is like a game changer for me because I notice when I lose focus because there's a little cute yellow timer that's like staring at me, telling me how many more minutes I told myself I was going to keep working on this thing. Right. So, like, those types of things have been really interesting and helpful for me. Also, noticing that I grossly underestimate how long things are going to take me and doubling the amount of time that I'm going to give myself to do something also helps me be on time to dinners and things like that. But what are some other helpful things that you've tried or things that you've seen work well for folks that you know?
I think that there's so many different tips and tricks and strategies out there. I think that's what's super helpful about any type of coaching is to figure out what works for you because there are so many out there. I think I've tried, pretty much everything. I know I have friends who the Pomodoro method works really well with of setting the timer that they might have on their desk to 25 minutes and take a break. That does not work for me. I've tried it. I'm like, it's just not working for me. So I do think that some strategies that work for me are, to your point, setting extra time to get to things. If I have an appointment, I'll block off my calendar for a whole half hour extra to make sure I have time to get there. When I think about the workplace environment, I think that asking for, technology. I think technology, we live in an age where generative AI and technology, it's available. And I don't think it's a weakness to ask to leverage some of it to help you with your job. I think a lot of companies use Google Meet, for example, and that I think now has the Gemini transcribe. So when you're on a call and you don't want to take notes, because if you take notes, you're distracted, you can use generative AI portion of that to transcribe your conversation. So that's very tactical. I think some companies, before we had Gemini to transcribe, I actually went and got a license for Otter AI. It's another tool. Again, every company has different things, but I think a lot of companies are realizing that they need to be more accommodating for neurodivergent and, the way different people's brains work and the way different people work. So I think asking and looking into your company's technologies that are available and getting licenses for them is really helpful. ChatGPT is my best friend. And I say that with the asterisk of I work in also the AI and analytics space, and you have to be very careful about the outputs and making sure that you're understanding what it is. But I am not concise. I am not concise in my emails. I am not concise in how I talk. I am not concise in my messages on Slack. So I have been able to just blurt out everything I want to say on, say, a Word document, and I don't stress about grammar or if it sounds nice or whatever. And then I just throw it into ChatGPT and I say, make this more concise and flow better. And obviously you want to read back through it, but it seems so tactical. But the time saving, I think the bigger picture is the time saving that technology tools can provide. I think leverage them. And I think that's a super tactical way, tip that I would recommend. I think the biggest thing that has helped me, and it's interesting, I was talking with one of the women at the master's program thing that I was helping with business analytics, and she had brought up that she had ADHD. Then we started to talk, and it was really powerful because one of the things I told her, and this is the tip I will give is, and it seems so simple, but it's to give yourself grace. I think that's my motto over the past couple of years, especially the last 2-3 years of I now realize old Katarina would have looked at her to-do list and been really frustrated for all of the days that I didn't get a single thing done on that to-do list that I wanted to. Didn't mean that maybe I didn't do anything that day, but I would have been very hard on myself because now I know more about my ADHD. Katarina now understands that my energy and focus ebbs and flows, and that's okay. And for example, I wanted to get all of the things done. I wanted to prep for this podcast on Sunday, and I just didn't have all of the energy that I wanted to. And I normally would have been harsh on myself, but I gave myself some grace. I had a very long week. I had renovation stuff on Saturday. It was my like one day to rest and watch my Real Housewives or true crime or whatever it was, right? No in between. And I gave myself grace. And I think that the more you can understand about how your brain works and accept that it ebbs and flows, if that is the case for you, it definitely is the case for me. Giving yourself grace and not being so hard on yourself for not doing the things you feel that you need to do is probably one of my biggest tips. And again, it's sounds pretty simple, but I think it's a difficult thing to do. It's a everyday conscious effort. It doesn't just come naturally. Like I'm always just giving myself grace. It's a very conscious effort every single day.
Yeah, I love so much of what you said. I think the technology piece, what I've noticed is that it's so helpful for me to use ChatGPT to get started on something.
Hmm.
One of the tasks I dread the most is writing anything, like copywriting. Like if
Hmm.
I have a talk that I'm doing for a company and I need to write up a little blurb on what the talk is about. I've got the talk, it's already mapped out, it's whatever. And so I'll put the outline of the talk into ChatGPT and be like, write me 3 to 5 sentences on this thing. And then I will change
Hmm.
probably 80% of it, but having something to work with as a starting point for me, I've found to be so helpful. So I don't know if that's an ADHD thing or if it's 'cause it's like sitting down with a blank sheet of paper in front of me and having to do something. It's so intimidating and I don't get anything done, right? To get over that hump of the task initiation, I've learned to drop my thoughts into a document along the way, like weeks in advance. And then I just have a couple things to start with when I sit down to do something. It's like an idea will pop up and I automatically just put it in a place where it's supposed to be so that when I sit down, I'm never sitting down in front of a blank sheet of paper.
I think everyone now has found the secret of ChatGPT, right? Everyone uses it to simplify tasks and write things for them. And I think that the difference with leveraging it for ADHD is that maybe someone who is neurotypical would have that blank page of paper and they may not know exactly where to start, but they'd still start in some aspect of starting. Whereas if I don't know where to start, I'll close my laptop and go do something else, right? And I won't be able to get back into it. And so I totally agree. I mean, all the copy on my website, I word vomited everything into a Google Doc, my entire story, everything I wanted to be taken away, my values, everything. And I asked ChatGPT to organize it for me. And then I went back in and combed through it. So I do think that whether it's not being able to be super concise and organize my thoughts in a way, and I think the conciseness comes from, it goes back to prioritization. I think every bit of information is very important, which is where maybe sometimes I overshare or I'm not as concise. And so I think it helps with that. And then I think, to your point, if you don't know exactly where to start, or I even sometimes will ask it to break something down, or if I don't understand something, maybe something with taxes, forget it, I'll go ask it a couple of questions and it'll give me a very quick way to be able to start something. So I'm totally with you on the kind of gets you going, gives you that push, if you will.
The other thing, and I just was doing some research on this morning, is because I was I want to understand what dopamine deficiency really means. And, with ADHD, one of the things is having just lower dopamine levels in general and or not functioning the same way as someone who's neurotypical in terms of regulating dopamine in your body. And so I was because I know social media is one of the worst, scrolling social media is one of the worst things you
Oh
can
my
do
gosh, yeah.
for dopamine regulation. So I was
Yeah.
what else? And so I was what are the things that would be helpful? And it's daily movement, eating things with high amino acids, sunlight, sleep hygiene, healthy
Yeah.
stimulation, not being overstimulated, and all of those life things, right?
Yeah.
Adulting, healthy, normal things are oh, that makes a lot of sense why in that downtime in the holidays when it's gray and most people are out of town and I'm just alone at home, watching TV, which feels very restful, but it's not. It's
Mhm.
Yeah, of course, I don't have social connection during that time. I'm probably not eating the most healthy things. I'm probably not working out as regularly because like everything is weird that week. And so
Mhm.
it makes so much sense to me now that like, yes, should I be doing these things? Should we all be doing these things every day or every week just to stay healthy? Absolutely. And if I don't do them consistently, it's this kind of like build up effect of like not doing the thing and then having lower dopamine. And that
Yeah.
cycles into then it's harder to start doing those things or to get the motivation to do them. And so it is this like virtuous cycle or downward spiral, either way you look at it. And I think that for me was really interesting is like those maintenance things are so much more important.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Because of the lack of dopamine, I think it can be even more detrimental for when we don't do the things that every, adult is supposed to drink this much water, eat this certain type of thing, walk this many steps, do your stretches, write your thoughts in a notebook every morning. Like there's just so many things of how to stay mentally well. I've got my sun lamp over here for my seasonal depression. And so there's so many things that as humans we're told to do, sleep hygiene. I think that it impacts us even more when we have already like our level of dopamine is already lower than the average level. And so I do notice and it's kind of a vicious cycle of it's very hard for me to fall asleep at night because I've got the little kids running around in my head. But sleep hygiene is super important because I notice that when I don't get enough sleep, everything feels more in every sense of the word, and it's a lot harder to prioritize, and the overwhelm and even the emotions. I think, being highly emotional can be a big part of ADHD, which is, like I mentioned, it could be a great strength, but it can also be a challenge. And I think that's heightened when I'm not doing those basic hygiene things of sleeping well, eating right. But yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So we talked about a lot of things. And I would say for anyone curious about neurodivergence for themselves, of course, like back to the disclaimer during the intro to this episode, consult a professional, but like
Yes.
also just do some research and maybe try experimenting with some different tips and little hacks and putting little mechanisms in place and see if they start to help, because it's one of those things where you don't need an official diagnosis to like set a timer for yourself and see how much it helps you or hurts you, and I think everything's always an experiment, right, when it comes to like productivity and what works for you at work. So
Yeah.
what parting thoughts do you have?
Yeah. Oh, I have so many all the time. I think that there's so many resources out there. Obviously, you and I could talk through all of the articles and stuff that we've read. I think to your point, I think that there are experts out there, obviously from the therapy side, but also from the coaching side to kind of work with you to figure out what works for you. I just think that the more, and again, I think maybe part of this for me has come with age, but I think a lot of it has come with accepting and understanding who I am and why I've done these things. I think the more you learn about yourself and the more you learn about your ADHD and the more you understand strengths and challenges, I think that the more you can give yourself a break. I know I said give yourself grace, but give yourself a darn break because there is so much going on in the world. Everyone always has so much to do. I read this thing the other day that, it kind of feels like you're always going against current, like how ADHD feels, like you're going against current that no one can see and you never quite get to shore. And I think that's really an accurate description of what ADHD feels like. And so the days that you check off one thing on your to-do list, give yourself a pat in the back and go have a snack. Like it's just, give yourself some grace and know that you're not alone. There are resources out there and people out there to help you advocate for yourself, help you figure out what works. And yeah, I think this has been such a great conversation and I love to talk about this topic because I think it's important.
Yeah, well, we'll put your website in the show notes. I have one podcast. I think it's like an HBR Women at Work podcast that I found to be really interesting. Do you have any books or episodes or anything that are favorites of yours?
Oh, that's a really good question.
You probably have 20.
Yeah, I have a million. One of my favorite podcasts has been, I have a few, the Mel Robbins podcast. I mean, she's honestly, because she was diagnosed, I think in her 40s with ADHD. And when I heard that episode of her talking about it, a lot of times they'll get diagnosed because they're with their kids who are getting diagnosed and they're like, wait a second, that sounds a lot like me. But she ran through the different things of why she's been diagnosed or the symptoms that she had. I remember I listened to it when I was sitting on a plane and I almost started tearing up because I had felt so seen. So I do like her. There's a book and I'm blanking on the name. I think it's How to Keep House While Drowning, or I forget the exact thing, but it's talking about, a lot of it is talking about the pressure, especially with women, that we put on ourselves to always like keep things clean or do the laundry. And some of the things in there talks about there will always be laundry to do. Like there's always going to be things to do. And so don't put this pressure on yourself to have to do all the things all the time. It was just a really good book. So I'll try to find the name. Maybe you can link it in your show notes.
Yeah,
or
we'll
whatever.
put it in the links.
Lots. I've got 20 plus different books, like you said. So it's hard to pick just one.
Okay, amazing. Well, we'll put that one in there as well. And the podcast episode that you listened to that kind of
and your
was an aha moment
podcast.
for you.
Your podcast is on my list.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Katarina. It was great to have this conversation. And I'm working through things real time in terms of my own exploration. So I appreciate you coming on and talking through all this with me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you felt comfortable sharing more and look forward to learning more together about how your brain's working and how mine continues to work.
Funny, after this conversation, I was like, yeah, I think even more. There's even more like data points in the column of,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I could help you check more of those data points. But again, not a licensed professional here.